It's really an honor to be here to give the Sinclair lecture. And I promise that I will talk about corpus linguistics, though we will visit some bridges and a number of plates of spaghetti as we go along, some of them real ones, some of them metaphorical ones. But to get started, I actually want to take you to the Tuscan Word Center in October of 2001. And for those of you who don't know, at that point, John Sinclair and his wife, Elena Tonini Bonelli, were running corpus workshops and seminars in a villa in Tuscany, thus the Tuscan Word Center. And I figured, I will never be invited to the Tuscan Word Center. I had done my PhD with Doug Biber, and I worked on the Longman grammar. And I did a lot of analysis that was quantitative and used corpora that were tagged for part of speech. And John was emphasizing working with unannotated corpora, and he was not very impressed with quantitative studies. Plus, I was an American, and most of the funding for the Tuscan Word Center activities seemed to be EU-related. And I just thought, well, it would have been nice, but no way I'm going to see that place. And then, out of the blue, I got an invitation from John saying that he was running a week-long series of workshops for relatively young new scholars in corpus linguistics in Europe. And would I come and do a half-day workshop on any topic I wanted and just interact with everybody for the week? And I thought, he doesn't have to ask me twice. As you can see, if you can make out the faces, I've identified me and John, but there are several other people in that picture who are actually in the room right now. It was a great group of people. And even if you can't make out faces, if I listed all the names, they are names that you would recognize. It was an outstanding week, but what I really want to tell you a story about has to do with a plate of spaghetti. So I was the first to arrive for the week because of the way the flights worked out. And they knew I was coming a few hours earlier and had just told me, oh, grab a taxi from Pisa when you get in. So I got in around lunchtime. For some reason, I didn't get anything to eat, just got in the taxi and went out to the villa. And I remember being very tired and very hungry. And I got out, and it was a gorgeous day, and here's this wonderful villa, and I thought, oh, this is almost magical. And then I smelled this wonderful aroma that had to be a wonderful pasta dish. And I thought, oh, and this is perfect. Lunch is even waiting. And Elena came out and brought me into the house. And then she called to John and said, oh, Susan Conrad's here, and lunch is ready. And there was kind of a dim hallway, and I could tell this figure of a man comes walking out, and I'm thinking, oh, wow, I'm going to meet John Sinclair. And should I be ready to, like, defend quantitative corpus linguistics, or, what's going to happen? And he comes out, and he looks at me, and I kind of remember him squinting, and he says, are you here to eat my lunch? And I was completely speechless. And I thought, oh my God, and I am kind of here to eat his lunch because I am so hungry. That's what I want to do. Luckily, Elena came and graciously got me out of that, and there was plenty of spaghetti to go around completely. But that was my first memory of John in person. My first memory of this legendary figure who I knew had done so much to help people see how we could expand the boundaries of what we do with linguistic study and really come to understand language from whole different perspectives and in different ways. And on that note, what I want to go into is how can we continue to expand the boundaries and the impacts of corpus linguistics. And I especially want to talk about incorporating our linguistic knowledge with knowledge of experts in disciplines, especially disciplines who don't think of themselves as being language-related fields. And also about integrating corpus techniques with other research techniques. And then finally extending from description, because most of us are raised as descriptive linguists, and moving from that to advice and instruction as ways to continue expanding the boundaries. Why should we do this? Because instructors, students, professionals in other fields need us. They don't know that, most of them, but they need us. So what I want to do is give you a couple examples of corpus analyses, though a lot of my talk has to do with thinking about things at the project kind of level. And definitely it's a plea for applications of corpus linguistics, all from my personal experience, working on my personal experience. And a few caveats or disclaimers here. My example is definitely not the only example. There are other people sitting here right now who have great examples of very applied projects in different fields. I'm using mine because I know it. I'm also talking specifically about something in the US educational context. Now, I really don't want to be held responsible to have to explain the United States, especially right now. But this is a particular context, and I know in Europe, I learned at the Clarin workshop on Monday, there's a lot more collaboration with other disciplines already, it sounds like. It's fairly rare for linguists in the United States. I am also saying just a little bit about a lot of different things and kind of skating over a lot of details. We would be here all evening if I was filling in all the details, but I'm happy to, during the question session or later on or via email even, answer questions about specific areas that you're interested in. And finally, I want to say I believe that descriptive work is valuable. I'm encouraging application, but we need descriptive work too. So I'm not trying to argue we should get away from all descriptive work in corpus linguistics, but I am hoping that in the future, more corpus linguists think about real applications and kind of helping make changes in the world based on corpus analyses. So, my example comes from civil engineering, and so we meet our first cable-stayed bridge. Civil engineers are the people who work on infrastructure, mostly. So if you're thinking of bridges and roads, buildings, tunnels, those kinds of things. And working with civil engineers now, I notice things like bridges all the time. So this actually is a picture from our vacation in France, and that's my husband's bike helmet in the corner because I was on the back of our tandem. But I thought, oh, there's a bridge, a cable-stayed bridge, I have to get a picture of that. So virtually everyone has experience interacting with civil engineering projects because we use them all the time. What most people don't know is very much about how the profession works. There is a large amount of what I'd call high-stakes writing. The only product that most firms produce is writing. Civil engineers don't actually build anything. All they do is write instructions of various sorts for other people to build things. If it's ineffective writing, they have unhappy clients, they have all kinds of delays, projects that already cost hundreds of millions of dollars end up costing even more, and in the worst cases, they end up with injuries and even deaths of people. In virtually every survey of graduates of civil engineering programs and employers, almost always maybe the second thing that comes up is there needs to be better preparation for writing in practice. Over and over, that comes up. Meanwhile, at university courses, there's usually lots of writing, but very little writing instruction. And here I'm talking about undergraduate university courses in the US. I don't know about other places. So often, writing is something that has something to do with kind of arbitrary style rules that came down from some English department or God or somebody. They don't really know where. It has nothing to do with engineering. Engineering is the calculations, is what a lot of students and sometimes faculty think. There's this kind of vague concern about writing, but when I started looking at the field, I saw no one is studying it, really. Even technical writers pull out examples of things, but there are almost no systematic studies of what actually gets written by civil engineers and what gets written by students. So I thought, I see a problem, and corpus linguistics can help. So you might notice this is not the sort of collaborative project where somebody in another discipline had a research question and kind of came to me thinking I might be able to help. This was me seeing a problem in a field and coming in like, hi, I'm a corpus linguist and I'm here to help you. They had no idea even what a linguist was, let alone a corpus linguist in most cases. I think now, most of the time, most of the faculty I work with are happy that I appeared, though I imagine occasionally they think, what circle of hell is this and what did we do to deserve it? But how collaborative projects get started might be something we want to talk about during the discussion time. For those of you who have heard me talk in the past year, either in Mannheim or at the Corpus conference in Iowa or in Portland at a couple conferences, the project is going to sound familiar to you, if you remember. And there are a couple examples that I've taken that are the same, but I don't think anything will be a repeat. Or I don't think for anyone everything will be a repeat. So just to reassure you if you're thinking, doesn't this sound familiar? There are some new things coming up. The other thing I want to say with the example is another plate of spaghetti appears, this time on our dinner table, because my husband is a civil engineer. And I actually got started with this project because over dinner when I'd say, well, honey, how was your day? I started to hear so many complaints about new hires in their firm and how they couldn't write. There were so many complaints that I finally said, oh, bring me something to look at. And I was thinking, it can't be that bad. And I looked at it and I thought, whoa, it is that bad. No wonder my poor husband is complaining all the time. So then I started asking him more and more about what he does in practice as a civil engineer and getting more documents. And that got the entire process going. And eventually it has turned into what I call the Civil Engineering Writing Project. The goal of which is to investigate what civil engineers in practice write in successful texts, compare it to what students write in courses, see what the gap is, and then work on minimizing that gap. So teaching students writing skills so that they can be more successful when they go into practice when they graduate. I collaborate now with engineering faculty at my own university and then 3 other universities, and actually a couple others who are a little less involved, but have come on. And we've had a couple grants from the United States National Science Foundation so that we can do some larger things, but there are many points you'll see where we actually do small studies, and anyone could easily do that sort of small study without having to get a huge amount of funding for the bigger project that I describe. The way it's set up is diagrammed here, and I've put in bold the parts that I think are most typical for a corpus project. So first of all, we make a corpus, and the original one had the practitioner text and the student texts. Students from 35 courses at 5 universities, and we practitioner text from about 50 firms and agencies. Then there's the analysis section, as you'd expect, and the corpus analysis has various grammar features, word choice, errors. I'll show you a couple examples from that. But then also rhetorical analysis and holistic evaluation by practitioners. From that analysis, we got to what are the most problematic features for the students, develop teaching materials to address those features, and then use the materials in civil engineering classes. So this isn't writing class. This is for civil engineering practice. So we integrate them into the civil engineering courses, have students write papers again, and then it goes back into the analysis, which at this point is the assessment for have there been any changes in the student writing since they use those new materials. So it's really assessment of how effective are the materials. And to the side there, you'll see there's the box with interviews of practitioners, students, and faculty that inform the analysis and interpretations and figuring out what's important, and I'll talk about those a little more in a minute. So what I want to do is give you a couple examples of what we learned from the corpus analysis, which is the why engineers need corpus linguistics, and why linguists' interpretations of the findings aren't enough. So why we need those interviews, and then go on to some explanation of the application where we're really trying to address not just so what, which is what I always ask my students, but we're trying to go on to so what are we doing about it. So the first two parts get kind of integrated into these next examples. Starting with passive voice. If you have ever looked at technical writing manuals or even studies, I put in quotes, of passive voice, it usually comes out that either passive voice is some kind of angelic thing or it's an agent of the devil. So on the one hand, it can keep discourse focused on the object or process, which for a field like civil engineering is what you're really interested in, and helps writers avoid sounding obnoxiously egocentric. Like, well, who wants to sound obnoxiously egocentric in their writing? Okay, this sounds like a good thing. On the other hand, it's said to be sneaky, because it conceals the agent, and long, and boring, or in one of my favorite quotes, the perfect vehicle for documents that record material of no intended consequence to anyone at all. And you could go to text, probably almost any kind of text, and find examples that will support all of these things, really. But as we know, what matters is systematic analysis to try to see how these features really function. So rather than looking at just passive voice main sentences, we thought let's get a slightly bigger picture here of what's going on with what's said to be very impersonal way of writing in engineering. And immediately I thought of multidimensional analysis and looking at the impersonal style dimension. Now, some of you I know multidimensional analysis in detail. Some people have heard it several times over in the conference already, even if you didn't know it already. For those of you who don't, a very nutshell description is it's a method of counting a large number of linguistic features, and then through a factor analysis, which is a statistical technique, seeing which ones tend to occur together. So there are groups of linguistic features that occur together in texts. And the principle or assumption underlying it is groups of features work together for communicative functions in texts. As Andrew Hardy was saying, we don't just randomly pick out language pieces from bins randomly. we have functions that we're trying to fulfill. So that's the underlying idea with multidimensional analysis. And in 1988, Doug Biber did a multidimensional analysis of English using 23 different spoken and written registers. And one of the factors, so one of those groups of features, had the features you can see listed there, 4 different kinds of passive structures on this feature, on this factor, and then 2 features having to do with clause connections. Now, nobody said a priori these features should be together. This is just the math of features that co-occur together in texts. And it was interpreted, so after you have the factor, you interpret the dimension for what is the communicative function of it as impersonal style, or some people call it abstract style. So I thought, here's a way to get one perspective on passives and impersonal style features in the civil engineering texts. So we used a small subset, actually, of the whole corpus that we have to do this investigation into passive voice use, selecting the texts carefully, because for the kind of study we're doing, looking at the gap between the practitioners and students, we need to be comparing texts that are rhetorically similar. It makes no sense to compare texts that have very different audiences or purposes and then say, oh, they use these features differently, because it may just be due to the audience and purpose. So for the practitioner reports and the student reports, they are very similar in the rhetorical contexts, written to clients about specific projects. There is a problem that has to be solved. We also put in 50 journal research articles to make a comparison with practitioner reports, because those are the writing that the engineering faculty know and aim for. Many of the engineering faculty have never worked in industry, even though about 98% of the students at the schools I work at want to go into industry. So this is an example of a place where we could have actually just thought of designing a small study to do this. You don't have to have a big grant and be on a massive scale. So the results. The vertical line to the left is showing you a standardized scale. So 0, which is actually off the slide, is the mean for the 23 different spoken and written registers that Biber was studying. And then the higher up you are on that vertical line, the more frequent use there is of the impersonal style features. So you can see that the journal articles and the student reports have a very, very high frequency of those impersonal style features. The practitioner reports come out more like general academic prose. And in fact, statistically tested with an ANOVA, I've shown by the colors, the journal articles and the student reports had no significant difference, but the practitioner reports were significantly different than both of those other ones. So notice the student reports that have the rhetorical context very similar to the practitioner reports are coming out with many more impersonal style features. So what's going on? We look at the texts first. The practitioner reports that have fewer, they still have a lot of impersonal style features, but they have fewer than the other registers. Well, one thing that happens is there are human agents with active voice verbs. And I've given you an example there. Things like we recommend, first person pronoun, active voice. There are also a lot of sentences that have inanimate things as subjects with active voice sentences. So these things do things, like bridges. Bridge will maximize hydraulic capacity. The journal articles, on the other hand, have passives without agents in many, many more cases, including even with the same verbs that the practitioners tend to use in active, like recommend. So a journal article is more likely to say, it is recommended that. And even when an individual thing is really what's being studied for the research article, it's more common that some kind of general model is the grammatical subject, and then it gets used with passive voice. So even though in example 4 it's coming from an article that's just about a single bridge, it's a bridge foundation ground model is developed. It's not the bridge doing something. Also, you might have noticed with some of those practitioner examples already, sentences tend to have single ideas. They're just simple sentences. The journal articles tend to have many more complex sentences connected with those subordinators, and then also linking adverbials showing the overtly showing the connection between the ideas in sentences. Now, as linguists, we could say, all right, I can tell you a lot about what's going on here. So we've got these journal articles, the purpose of which is to talk about a general concept or model to develop that, and that's why we end up with more passive voice. And the practitioners seem to have some sort of value on, shorter sentences, being more direct with agents in some cases. But then it kind of starts to taper off exactly how much you can say about how much do these characteristics really matter in their context of use. And we're trying to understand what goes on in writing for practice, so it's important to know how important are these characteristics. The only people who can really tell us that are the engineers themselves. So that's where we get to the interviews. And at the point of this analysis that I'm talking about, I had interviewed 15 practitioners, 22 students, and 8 faculty members. And mostly I'm going to talk about the practitioners and also a little bit about the students. The practitioners, when I would show them samples of writing and just ask them to comment, or I show them alternative ways to word things, they would come out with comments often about managing liability in a field where you have to make subjective judgments. You are hired to make judgments, and you have to make subjective judgments. It isn't just facts. But you don't want to be responsible or make it sound like you have made some judgment that you haven't made or that somebody else made, and that overtly stating a first-person pronoun or a human and active voice is one way to make that very clear. They also mentioned recommend especially because it has legal consequences to it. If an engineer says, I recommend or we recommend and stamps it with their official license, a contractor has to follow that unless another engineer changes it. So it's another way to be very overt. Nobody can miss it if you say, we recommend. And one idea per sentence, they talked about, well, it's faster skimming for the clients. And they'd often comment, clients don't really read everything anyway, they just skim to get ideas. And even with having an inanimate object, an active voice sentence, they'd comment about, oh, faster reading for the client. Anything that made faster reading for the client was a good thing. Newsflash, professional writing isn't the same as academic journal writing. And I put that on as the newsflash here, and all of you are thinking, well, of course. But it was news to engineering faculty. And I think we also need to be careful, especially in LSP studies and studies of disciplines, because it's very easy to get academic journal article samples, generally. And it's also very easy to not write up results and conclusions clearly enough so that you are saying the academic representation of this discipline is like this. It's not all discourse for the discipline. So the journal article samples don't equal the disciplines. Many disciplines are much wider than the academic context that most of us are used to. Okay, what's happening with the students? Passives. Lots and lots of passives are happening with the students. So they rarely observe something themselves. It's all things were observed. Pedestrian activity was noted, and it was recommended. You never find out who recommended that. It was, I think it's actually the students, but it's impossible to tell. Or one of my favorites, it was hoped. Or one even more of my favorites, number 3, references found relating to the compaction of soils where the nature of the clay mineral changed after drying compared to using soils without initial drying was not clearly found. This becomes so twisted that it's actually references found or not found. And the purple underlined features are ones that are part of the impersonal style features. In interviews, students would repeatedly say things like, they somewhere had in their mind this rule that in technical writing you don't use I or we or us. Some of them knew they had heard it in some technical writing class. Most of them had no idea where they'd gotten that idea, but it was firmly entrenched. Or something like, you need to use objective language. And I think that corresponds directly with the it was hoped. So put it in passive, and it makes it sound more objective, which of course it doesn't. Or just, it looks better if it's longer. I think it's as simple as that. The students also used more connecting words and subordinators the way the journal articles would. And this, I think, was also related to the, it looks better if it's longer, and some of them would also say, if I showed them a sample, well, you just want to make it sound fancy. Or, in what I think was actually quite a revealing and somewhat insightful comment from one student, well, when you don't know what to do, you just throw up on the paper. And in fact, I think that relates also to the rhetorical structure that is often a problem for the students and relates to their using these connectors, but they aren't arranging information about what's the problem, what are the current conditions, what are the alternatives, and what's our preferred solution. They don't arrange it the way practitioner texts do, which is very linear, very predictable. It's hard to misunderstand a practitioner text. But the students have things back and forth and all over. And I realized, as part of what we're really studying here isn't just the linguistic features, we have to look at the rhetorical organization. So that got us into doing rhetorical analysis, which I'm not going to talk about, but leads me into making all sorts of crazy looking maps of rhetorical moves in students' papers to show just how unlinear they are. So my point with all of this is the corpus study, the multidimensional analysis, helps us understand the difference between student and practitioner writing quite a bit. The interviews, however, are very important in helping us understand what we should really be addressing and how important things are for the practitioners and why students are doing certain things. And the rhetorical analysis adds in to round out the pictures in ways that wouldn't be possible with just a corpus analysis. Okay, let me give you another shorter example about why engineers need corpus linguistics and corpus linguists need engineers' input, having to do with word choice. And I thought at first with word choices, how hard can it be? Well, I ate those words. And I was thinking, all right, we'll look at the frequency and dispersion, do some keyword analysis maybe, look at a few bundles. Here's just a couple examples of things that were coming up. But it was clear, this is not going to be very helpful for our kind of applied project. We've got some items reflecting different kinds of projects. So practitioners tend to work on bridges a lot, especially in the Northwest, because there's so much water, there's just a lot of places that need bridges. So something like bridge comes up. The students love anything that is in, so anything green, anything renewable. They're definitely going to add that to the paper. And roundabouts are an up-and-coming item in the US. So those get written about in transportation papers. But I didn't see how this was really going to get us on the way to making useful writing materials. And bundles, one of the side of it's interesting to a linguist that these kinds of frames can be so useful in building discourse, but I didn't see how I was really going to be able to use that for writing materials for these engineering students. I noticed at the same time as I was pondering this that when I would interview practitioners, when I showed them examples of student writing and asked for comments, they often commented on 3 things having to do with word use, even if I was trying to focus them on something else, just as they were reading. It was like they were compelled to comment on these things. One was misused terms. So they'd read something and just say, that's not the dead load, which at first I couldn't even understand what that was. At this point, I have a better idea. But those misused terms, they noticed, similar words that were used inaccurately. So for instance, the difference between estimating, calculating, and determining a value for a variable was very important to some of the engineers. And then non-technical words with potentially serious liability consequences because they weren't accurate. So for instance, create a safe bicycle crossing. That would make a transportation engineer just kind of have the top of their head blow off. There is no way to create a safe bicycle crossing. I mean, the only way to have a safe bicycle crossing is probably no one ever use it, because even if there were no cars in the area, a cyclist might run into a curb, and fall down and hurt themselves, and then it's not safe. But I was still thinking, okay, I see these patterns in what they're commenting on, but how on earth is it possible to make this practical enough to do the analysis we want to do and be able to do the assessment of materials after we figure out what it is we're going to do anyway? And I knew that engineering faculty already commented on misused technical terms, and I certainly couldn't rely on linguists to recognize them, so that was kind of out. There wasn't enough context to judge some of the near synonym choices. And then, even for that last category, every word has the potential to be inaccurate or imprecise or ineffective. So I thought, I just didn't know how to grapple with this. But I would look at student papers, and for instance, here's a typical thing from a senior level report, a capstone course. These students are about to graduate, and they'll say things like, a project like this takes great coordination and planning to make sure da-da-da-da-da. And even just a few months into the project, even to me, this kind of thing was raising alarm bells. So I thought, okay, I can come up with the suspect word list of words that are not technical, but are often misused. Vague, absolute, superfluous, just typically inaccurate, or often inaccurate. And I came up with a list of 45 words and phrases. And from looking at papers, talking with engineers about what they saw. But as I looked, I noticed that even those suspects could be used accurately and appropriately. So if you have questions, please call us, that's fine. Hot and cold water pipes. Usually hot and cold are way too vague, but for pipes, that's fine. I thought at least safe will be safe, but no, it turns out it's a kind of analysis that has a software acronym with it. So, as we've heard several times in talks, back to the concordance listings and looking at the context. So I check every suspect in context, I or someone else, and do an iterator reliability check with a practitioner to make sure that what we're judging as effective is the same as what they would judge. And in one study of this that we ran with practitioner reports and tech memos and student senior level reports and tech memos, and then lab reports of the junior level students, indeed there is a significant difference between the student writing and the practitioner writing. I included the junior level and senior level and analyzed them by themselves first to see what was going on, because one of the faculty members who I work with thought it's really just a matter of maturity. he said. Students get more mature and they use words more accurately. I'm not sure I believe that, plus I think we could help them along. And it turned out their first term junior level lab reports were not different than the senior level student ones. Let's, in the interest of time, I think not talk about the error analysis. But if you are interested in error analysis, I would be happy to talk about it more in the question time. The short ideas are, I didn't want to do it, but there were so many that I decided I had better. And the student papers have a lot of errors in just basic standard written English. Okay, let's go to the application. So we are really trying to get to, so what are we doing about this? The new teaching materials. So this is moving from description to evaluation and advice, really out of the realm of corpus linguistics and into application of what we're finding from the findings. And I have to tell you immediately, little alarms were going off for me. Caution sign, or one of my favorite signs from Portland, the uh-oh, we're about to have a disaster here, or even the help, I'm going to slide down this slippery slope and end up drowning. On the other hand, I would look at the advice that was given to students, even handbooks that are in their 4th edition or 5th edition. There is a lot of bad advice. A lot of it is completely decontextualized. A lot of it is misleading about choices in English. So if we go back to the verb voice, passives, so one, just avoid nominalizations in the passive voice whenever possible. Well, that's pretty straightforward. Just avoid it. But a site that is highly regarded, the Purdue Writing Lab, says for engineering reports, methodology is written in passive voice. Just no buts, ands, or ifs about it. Okay. And then from a very popular handbook for students, sentences become more vigorous, direct, and efficient in the active form. By showing that a person's involved in the work, you're doing no more than admitting reality. Okay, so it sounds like we should use active voice for methods. But then, another handbook, we need the passive voice. It stops us from repeatedly having to use I or we or some other agent. What on earth a student or anybody else would make of this collection of advice, I have no idea. Well, I have some idea because I see the papers that result from it. But also, one of the things that really bothers me is the advice misrepresents English so much. There are so many more choices than just having passive voice or a human agent and active. So it's really a disservice to students. So I said, all right, we can do this. Dive into the teaching materials. And we have developed teaching materials that address the language choices, which are really the things that come out of the corpus analysis, things like choosing between active and passive. We also have genre-based lessons that come largely out of the rhetorical analysis, and then also grammar and mechanics lessons, which also come out of the corpus analysis. And the typical process is we'll have a first draft, usually by a linguist, usually by me, with engineering faculty collaboration. But I have found this is the most efficient way to go about it. I've had some of the engineers I collaborate with, engineering faculty, do a first draft after I give them some results, and it just leads us into a longer process. So usually I draft a unit. Then I get comments from the engineering faculty, from other linguists, and 2 engineering practitioners to make sure anything we're saying, even if it's made simpler for students, doesn't give bad advice for practice. So even if it has to be simplified, at least it's leading them down the right road. Then revisions to the units and revisions and revisions, piloting with the students and more revisions and more revisions. And when we're generally happy enough with it, we make a webcast to introduce the written unit. And there's a whole other story with the webcasts, actually, which I'm not going to go into right now. But again, if you'd like to hear about that, ask me. So one of the things we try to do is teach students how to make choices. And we, again and again, every single unit says writing is about judgment. It's just like engineering. You've learned that you can't do engineering without exercising judgment. And it's just like that with writing. Nobody can just give you rules. So this is a little piece from a unit about choosing between active and passive. And we give them examples of what practitioners tend to do with explanation of what they're supposed to see in the examples. We learned quickly that they need explanation, pointing out exactly what they're supposed to see and where and why practitioners are doing what they do. We do directly warn against a few structures, like what we also simplify language for them, the empty it passive voice sentences. It was noticed, it was observed, and warn them against those, saying they are rarely effective. We make sure they can recognize those structures because we also learned through trial and error, even when students thought they knew what a certain structure was, they often did not. And we give them specific techniques for revising. So it's not just don't use that. It's, well, consider, would this be more effective with a first-person pronoun and active voice? Or if it's something like it was observed, you might just be able to say during our observation and then just say what happened. So we give them alternatives they can use. We also put in some simple corpus analysis results, but nothing as complicated as, say, the multidimensional analysis. So that gets reduced down to just percentage of simple sentences to show the students practitioners really do use a lot more just simple sentences. And we also counter misconceptions that we've heard many times in interviews, and we call them the myth-buster boxes. So this one, for instance, isn't passive voice better because it makes writing sound objective? And we just come right out and say, no, that's the wrong idea. Here's another example from the word choice unit. Again, specific techniques. Here's a sentence that needs to be revised. Here's a revision of it, exemplified. Long, to me, explanation of points you're supposed to notice. But again, when we didn't have the explanation, for instance, this is the sentence with great coordination. I actually worked with a class using this unit, and a student called me over, so how about if I just say good instead of great? And they just didn't get the idea of what was wrong with great. So more explanation and showing them, like detailed coordination is probably what the writer means here. And we emphasize in the word choice unit precision and accuracy of meaning, because this idea of style does not serve the students well. They'll get some idea of, oh, use a formal style, or it's kind of the be fancy sort of thing, and it just does not result in effective texts. And the goal is really unambiguous, accurate meaning. I also do some workshops for practicing engineers now. Engineers that I was collaborating with asked me to come into their firms, and with them I go even more into linguistic principles. So here's just a quick piece of a slide, and I really introduce them to the principle of end weight. And we use that to talk about how can you make a choice between active and passive voice when end weight's one of your considerations, and we go through other considerations also. So we make those teaching materials, and then we try them out with the students and and the students are writing their regular assignments for classes as usual. We collect the assignments, the post-intervention assignments as we call them, after they've used the teaching materials, do all those analyses again. And so far, it's almost kind of embarrassing, but every quantitative analysis has come out with statistically significant improvement for the students. And the holistic analysis by the practitioner also has come out with statistically significant improvement, which to me is a very important measure because sometimes you can improve individual features, but it doesn't add up to greater effectiveness overall. So I'm very pleased with how the results are going, and also by student comments that show they are thinking about the kinds of things we want them to think about. Even if they have trouble getting it into writing sometimes, at least they know things like they're impressed by how precise engineering writing has to be, or that there's no such thing as a synonym. So we see students are at least knowing they have to think about their word choice carefully. And though we don't study the faculty at all, there are some positive faculty comments, like how much easier it is to grade papers after you actually teach some writing skills beforehand. So I'm pleased, but let's talk about the challenge of it all. And here we get back to the cable-stayed bridges, which I think are just the most elegant structures, probably in all of human structures. The flow of them usually is really pretty. They have all these parallel cables that look kind of delicate, but then they work together and make a very strong structure. Even like the one on the left, I'm sorry, that picture is even worse than it looked in person. It's actually quite a smoggy day in Bangkok. But even on this smoggy day and with buildings that weren't very pretty, that cable stay bridge just rises above it as this elegant structure. And that's the way I envision the whole project. From the beginning, that's how I envisioned the whole project. And then I started working on it. And rather than a cable-stayed bridge, it was really more like a plate of spaghetti that was a total mess. And somehow I was supposed to get those spaghetti strands to make themselves into a cable-stayed bridge. And then I worked on it some, and it seemed like it kind of turned into a plate of cooked spaghetti. It's like things are getting more complicated and harder to sort out. And a project of this sort has so many different pieces to it, different people working on it. It would be deceptive of me to say it doesn't really feel like the spaghetti rather than the bridge sometimes. But let's talk about taking up the challenge and why I think it is possible to do this sort of work and have good results. And should you be interested, these are kind of my tips from my experience. One, relationships with the experts in the discipline and the specific context of work, if it's academic or not, are very important, crucial. Marriage, I think, is not required. It worked for me. But some way in is important, but I think the even more important part of it is time. At least for somebody like me, I am not naturally very social, and I don't go in and make friends right away. But I think for a lot of other researchers too, there's this element of time when you're working with people and you have to build up the relationship and get their trust. It was probably 2 to 3 years into the project. And first my husband gave me connections, and then I'd talk to some other engineer who'd send me to some other engineer, and I'd just start networking that way. So 2.5 or 3 years into the project, my husband came home from 2 different meetings, a few weeks apart, and he said, sounding sort of cranky about it, that he had sat down by somebody he didn't know and talked to that person, and a couple minutes into the conversation, the person said, "Oh, I think I know your wife." And I thought, I am getting into this community of engineers. I would also encourage people to consider working outside of academia, even though I think it takes an extra little motivation sometimes because we tend to know academia and it's closer around us. But there are many, many non-academic needs, and corpus linguists are the people to investigate more about the language needs. I think it's also important as part of the relationships to choose venues for dissemination thoughtfully. So for instance, not too long ago, I went to a conference called the Structures Congress. And you might hear that and think, oh, structures, you know, grammatical structures, syntactic structures. No, it's buildings and bridges and how do you make things safe for earthquakes. And I could not understand really any session except my own. But I got a very good reception at it, and it gave me the opportunity to recruit more people for the study. I just said, and if you liked this work and you wouldn't mind reading some student papers and doing a holistic evaluation of them, give me your business cards. And something like that gave me more people to collaborate with. Another point of success, as I was saying at the beginning, is corpus plus other analysis techniques. Often, just the linguistic corpus study doesn't speak enough to people outside of linguistics. What's going on rhetorically, what is going on in the bigger context of interviews, getting incorporation of more perspectives is very important for this kind of work. I think also being willing to accept feasible, useful solutions which maybe aren't the most glamorous or best sounding research, but still do the job. So for instance, with the word choice analysis, my first thought was, I cannot possibly tell a group of corpus linguists that I just studied 45 suspect words. But then I thought, why not? That's what worked and has proved really useful for making the teaching materials and helping students move on the path they need to move on in their writing. And then also moving from the functional descriptions that we're used to evaluative advice. So getting to that, so what do we do about this, and diving in and trying it. And it certainly is not like all our first drafts are successful, but it is satisfying seeing an impact. So I am happy to give out the slides if you'd like to get a copy. Here are a few references if you wanted to find out more. And there are many people and the National Science Foundation that I give thanks to for making the project possible. And thanks to all of you for your attention. And I'll leave you with the image of the Tillicum Crossing in Portland, which is our newest cable-stayed bridge. So you can have the image of a project that, you know, is elegant and all the cables are working together to make it stronger. Thank you very much.